Good morning. Today is Wednesday, May 28th, 2025. Today is Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the first day of the Jewish month of Sivan. Today also is the 600th day since the war began, the 600th day that hostages are still being held in Gaza by Hamas. It's hard to fathom that we are at this point, and even harder to fathom that at least I'm not seeing any kind of plan that is likely to bring them home soon. I hope that I'm wrong. But certainly every moment their lives are in danger. And they need to come home. Hamas needs to release them, and Israel needs to do what it needs to do to get them back. 600 days. Let's talk about Shavuos. On Shavuos, we read Sefer Ruth, the Book of Ruth. And we've discussed in the past there are a number of different reasons why we read this particular book on Shavuos. One of the reasons has to do with the fact that this book traces the genealogy of David HaMelech, King David, the great-grandson of Ruth and Boaz. And Shavuos is known to us as the yahrzeit of King David. So there is this strong connection, and so we read the Book of Ruth as a way to remember the origin of David. But I want to share with you a subtext of the Book of Ruth. I think it's very powerful, and it's very subtle on purpose. But I think once we see it, it will allow us to read and to appreciate this short book in a new and deeper way. There was once a rabbi who served in a number of rabbinic positions, and he was asked why he had so many different rabbinic jobs, and he said that his motto was, tell the truth and see the world. Actually, it's not really so hard to tell the truth. The real difficulty, the real accomplishment, is to be able to tell the truth in a way that people can hear and accept. And I want to suggest to you that the Book of Ruth is a perfect example of how this can be done. According to Abarbanel, classic commentator on the Torah, the Book of Ruth was written by Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Samuel. And he wrote it as a tribute to David HaMelech. Remember that Shmuel is the one who anointed David as king. Remember, of course, that he had earlier anointed Saul, as king, and that didn't work out so well. But he then anointed King David, who became David HaMelech, King David. And that, of course, was very, very successful. And so he wrote this work as a tribute to David. And that's the reason that in the traditional order of the books of the Torah, the Book of Ruth is placed just before Tehillim, the Book of Psalms, which was written by David. And it is a flattering tribute. It shows that David's ancestry on his father's side goes back to Yaakov's son Yehuda, from whom kings are destined to come. And it tells the story of his illustrious ancestor Ruth. And clearly her attributes of piety and nobility and self-sacrifice as described in Sefer Ruth, in this narrative. They're intended to presage the personality of this young monarch, David, who became David HaMelech. However, Shmuel inserts into the subtext of this narrative a very sharp lesson for David and for all who presume to be Jewish leaders. It's not overt, but it's there. And it's very serious. And it goes like this. At the beginning of the Book of Ruth, we read about a famine in the land of Israel. And then we read about the death of Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, just after leaving their home in Bethlehem, and they left for the fields of Moab on the eastern bank of the Jordan River. And first Elimelech dies, and then their two sons Machlon and Kilion die. And the Midrash, our rabbis in the Midrash say as follows: why was Elimelech punished with death before his time? The Midrash understands that Elimelech's death came as a punishment for something. And they answer, because when the famine came to the land of Israel, he said to himself, now everyone will be coming to me for food. This one with his cup, that one with her plate. So he arose and fled from them to Moab. And this is the meaning of the verse, the pasuk near the beginning. And a man traveled from Bethlehem in Yehuda. And the accusation is, the criticism is, that Elimelech was a leader. He was the leader. And the role of a leader is not just to receive honor and power and wealth. The role of an authentic Jewish leader is to provide for his people, to be the source of their sustenance, to be the source of their physical sustenance as well as their spiritual sustenance. Rabbi Yochanan Zweig, a great scholar that I've quoted to you many times before, he points out, first of all, that the city into which David and other kings were born and from which Elimelech flees is Bethlehem. We translate that as Bethlehem. That's a city south of Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Bethlehem. The word Bethlehem means house of bread. And it indicates that being the city that many of the kings of Israel came from, David being the first of a long line, the name of the city that they come from, the house of bread, indicates that the leaders, the kings, those who are given positions of high leadership in the Jewish people, should be the source of sustenance for their people. They should be Bethlehem, the source, the house of bread, providing for the physical needs of their people. And so the place where they come from is identified as producing Jewish leaders, and at the same time attempts to define the priorities of the role of those Jewish leaders to provide for the physical and spiritual sustenance of their people. And therefore, for Elimelech to leave at the time of a famine was a cardinal sin, a terrible sin. Rabbi Zweig points out that this role was even understood by Paro in Egypt. We learn in the Torah in Bereshis, Paro had a disturbing dream about 7 cows, 7 thin cows, 7 fat cows, and also another dream about sheaves of wheat, 7 fat sheaves of wheat, 7 thin sheaves of wheat. And he calls on his wizards and advisors to interpret it, but none of them can do so to his satisfaction. And then he ends up calling Yosef. Rashi points out that his wizards and his advisors did offer interpretation. The 7 cows indicated Paro would have 7 daughters and they would die, God forbid. Different interpretations they give. But these kinds of personal interpretations that somehow this dream had something to do with Paro's personal life, they did not satisfy him, because Paro realizes if he's the Paro, he's the king of Egypt, and he's having these dreams, and they are indeed a message for him, they must relate to his role as a monarch. And that role is primarily to provide for his people. And so when Yosef comes along and provides an interpretation that has to do with the problems he's going to have feeding his people, after the 7 years of plenty, there will be 7 years of famine, that interpretation rings true to Paro because it relates to what he understands is his role as the leader. And for a Jewish leader like Elimelech to flee from Beis Lechem precisely when he is most needed because of the famine is to abdicate his deepest responsibility, his primary responsibility. And years later, when Naomi returns alone to Beis Lechem, now together with Ruth, she is humiliated. She expresses this, that she is humiliated. And she's humiliated when she returns to Beis Lechem, not only because she's coming back poor and she left wealthy and aristocratic. And it's not only because she left with a husband and 2 sons and all of them died. But Naomi is also ashamed to be identified with, to have been connected to one who forsook his people in their time of need. And the rest of the narrative is Naomi's attempt to rehabilitate herself, to reestablish herself together with Ruth as a woman of caring and nobility who can be, once again, a role model of Jewish leadership for future generations. Increasingly, it seems that our society defines its heroes as those for whom we must make the most allowances. We seem to believe that popularity brings with it an entitlement to self-centeredness. Shmuel begins his tribute to David with a veiled warning, as much directed to our time as to his. And by weaving this warning subtly into the fabric of an otherwise glowing tribute, Shmuel manages to convey a serious message that can be more easily heard and heeded by even the most powerful monarch. And that message to David, subtly and respectfully, but to this young king that he had just anointed, that message is that a leader abdicates his responsibility to his people at his own peril. And he must always remember for whom he is working and what his priorities must be. Jeffrey Salkin tells the story of a Hasidic Rebbe who, while once walking in a neighboring village late at night, met another man who was also walking alone. And for a while, the 2 men walked in silence. And finally, the Rebbe turns to this man and says, "So who do you work for?" And the man says, "I work for this village. I'm the night watchman." And they walk on in silence again. And finally, the night watchman asks the Rebbe, "And who do you work for?" And the Rebbe said, I'm not always sure, but I'll tell you this. Name your present salary and I will double it. All you have to do is walk with me and ask me from time to time, who do you work for? My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.